3 months ago, my dad sold my car without my permission to pay for my stepbrother's college tuition. He said I needed to grow up and contribute to the family. Yesterday, I sat across from him and my stepfamily at the bank while the manager asked him to verify the transfer of $1.2 million from my account to purchase the family lake house he's been dreaming about for 20 years. The look on his face? Priceless. But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about what happens when the child everyone dismisses turns out to be the one holding all the cards. I never planned to be successful just to prove them wrong. But sometimes, life has a way of serving justice when you least expect it. And trust me, you'll want to hear how I went from the family disappointment to the one person they couldn't ignore anymore. If you're dealing with family who underestimates you, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about turning the tables when everyone least expects it. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My dad, Robert Wilson, was always the kind of man who valued appearances and traditional success above all else. Growing up in our suburban home outside of Boston, it was clear that his definition of achievement was narrow: prestigious degrees, high-paying careers, and the right connections. When my mom died from cancer when I was 12, something broke in him. 2 years later, he married Diane, a woman with a ready-made family. Her son, Tyler, who was the same age as me, and her daughter, Megan, who was 2 years younger. Our blended family was anything but blended. From day one, there was a clear hierarchy. Tyler was the golden child, captain of the football team, straight-A student, headed for an Ivy League school. Megan was the perfect daughter, homecoming queen material with the right friends and right hobbies. And then there was me, the artsy, somewhat awkward biological daughter who didn't quite fit the mold. I remember my high school graduation party vividly. Dad had invited all his colleagues from his law firm, and Diane had orchestrated the perfect backyard celebration with catering from that trendy place in Cambridge everyone was talking about. I'd just been accepted to Rhode Island School of Design for Photography, a huge achievement considering their acceptance rate. When it came time for toasts, Dad clinked his glass and spoke for 5 minutes about Tyler's football scholarship to Princeton, then another 3 about Megan's volunteer work and early acceptance to Boston College. When he finally got to me, he just said, "And Jamie will be attending art school in the fall. Who wants dessert?" The pattern continued through college. When I struggled to make rent during my sophomore year, I called home asking if I could borrow $800 until my photography assistant job started the following month. Dad sighed and said, "This is why we wanted you to study business, Jamie. Tyler never asks us for money." What he conveniently forgot was that Tyler's entire education was being paid for, while I was on a partial scholarship supplemented by student loans I took out myself. After college, I moved to New York and started working for a small digital marketing agency. I was doing okay, but nothing spectacular. Meanwhile, family gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable as Tyler landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm and Megan got engaged to the son of one of Dad's golf buddies. During Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago, Dad actually said, "Well, at least Jamie's making honest money with her little photography side hustle." I was 24 and had just been promoted to creative director, but in his eyes, I was still playing with cameras. What none of them knew was that during my last year of college, I developed an algorithm for sorting and categorizing visual content that made digital asset management significantly more efficient. A tech startup in Brooklyn approached me after seeing it implemented on a client project, and I sold them the patent rights for a substantial sum and equity in their company. I invested nearly all of it in a mix of tech stocks, startups, and real estate, guided by my college roommate who had become a financial advisor. I didn't tell my family, partly because I didn't think they'd care, and partly because I wanted to see how long it would take them to actually ask about my life. The grand gesture happened 6 months ago. Dad announced at Easter dinner that he'd found the perfect lake house in the Adirondacks, the vacation home he'd talked about since I was a kid. It was a beautiful property with private shoreline access, a boat dock, and stunning views. The price tag was just over $1 million, and he said he was this close to making it happen, but needed to figure out some financial details. Everyone oohed and awed while I quietly ate my ham. 3 months later, I got a call from my bank. Someone had tried to sell my car, a used Subaru I'd bought myself, but had left at Dad's house when I moved to New York since parking was so expensive in the city. I drove it whenever I visited. Apparently, Dad had forged my signature on the title transfer. When I called him furious, he was dismissive. Tyler needed tuition money for his MBA, and you weren't using the car anyway. It's called family sacrifice, Jamie. Maybe if you ever finish paying off those art school loans, you'll understand what it means to manage real money. Little did he know, my little photography side hustle and investments had grown into a net worth of over $8 million, and I was about to buy that lake house right out from under him. Dad's 60th birthday was approaching, and Diane had planned what she called the celebration of the decade at their country club in Wellesley. Evites went out 6 months in advance, and the family group chat buzzed daily with updates about the menu, the live band, the specialty cocktails named after Dad's favorite golf courses. It was going to be, as Diane kept reminding everyone, an event befitting a man of Robert's stature. I'd been invited, of course, though the invitation came with Diane's passive-aggressive note. "We know how busy you are with your photography, but family milestones should take priority." I RSVP'd yes and booked my flight from New York. 2 weeks before the party, I received a call from a real estate agent in Lake Placid. The lake house Dad had been eyeing had just gone on the market, but the sellers wanted a quick close. Dad had put in an offer, but he was still sorting out financing. Apparently, he'd been counting on an end-of-year bonus that wasn't going to be as substantial as he'd hoped. The agent, knowing I'd expressed interest months earlier when I'd quietly inquired, wanted to know if I was still interested. I was. Very interested. I called my financial advisor that afternoon and set everything in motion. By the time I boarded my flight to Boston for Dad's birthday weekend, I had a signed purchase agreement for the lake house, contingent on a final walkthrough and wire transfer that would happen the following Monday, 2 days after Dad's party. When I arrived at my childhood home on Friday night, the house was in full pre-party chaos. Diane was directing a small army of caterers who were preparing appetizers for the intimate family dinner before the main event Saturday. Tyler was there with his girlfriend, a willowy blonde named Madison who worked at the same consulting firm. Megan and her husband Dave were setting up a slideshow of Dad's life, notably heavy on photos from the last 15 years and light on anything from when my mom was alive. "Jamie, you made it," Dad said when I walked in, giving me a brief side hug. "You remember the Prestons, right? Jen's daughter went to that art school too. What was it again?" "Rhode Island School of Design," I said, smiling tightly at the Prestons, who I'd never met before. Right, Dad waved his hand dismissively. Jamie does something with Instagram or websites or something. Very creative." "I'm a creative director at Atlas Digital," I corrected. "We just won a Webby Award for our campaign with—" "Tyler," Dad interrupted, spotting my stepbrother coming down the stairs. "Come tell Jim about that McKinsey project you're heading up." And just like that, I was invisible again. Dinner that night was a preview of what was to come. Diane had prepared all of Dad's favorites, and the conversation revolved entirely around Tyler's recent promotion, Megan's new house in Beacon Hill, and Dad's golf handicap. When I mentioned I was thinking about buying property upstate, Diane laughed. "Oh, Jamie, always dreaming big. Maybe start with a studio apartment you actually own before thinking about vacation homes."
I smiled and took another sip of wine. The next day, the country club was transformed into a shrine to Robert Wilson. Photo collages, video tributes, and speeches from his law partners all celebrated his professional achievements and community standing. During cocktail hour, I overheard him talking to Tyler about the lake house. "It's frustrating as hell," Dad said, swirling his scotch. "The sellers want to close by next week, and the bank is dragging their feet on the equity line. I might lose it." "That's rough," Tyler commiserated. "Maybe we could pool some family resources."
"I could put in a bit from my bonus." Dad clapped him on the shoulder. "That's why you're going places, son. Always thinking solutions." I excused myself to the restroom, where I checked my email. The real estate agent had confirmed our Monday appointment at the bank in Lake Placid. Everything was set. When it came time for family toasts, Diane went first, gushing about her incredible husband of 15 years. Megan spoke about what an amazing role model Dad had been. Tyler gave a polished speech about Dad's mentorship and guidance. When the microphone came to me, I felt every eye in the room, most of them expecting something awkward or forgettable. "Dad," I began, "you've always taught me that actions speak louder than words, that success isn't just about talking a good game, but about delivering results. I've taken that lesson to heart more than you know." I raised my glass. "To many more years of surprising achievements." Dad looked slightly confused, but nodded appreciatively. If he only knew what was coming. After the toasts, during dinner, the conversation turned once again to the lake house. Dad sighed dramatically. "I might have to let it go. Unless the bank pulls through by Monday, some other lucky family will be enjoying those Adirondack sunsets." "That's such a shame," I said, my voice dripping with sincerity. "Actually, I'm heading up to Lake Placid on Monday for a meeting. Maybe I could stop by, put in a good word with the sellers." Dad laughed. "Unless you're bringing a cashier's check for $1.2 million, I don't think that will help much, sweetheart." "You never know," I said, smiling. "I can be pretty persuasive." As the party wound down, Dad pulled me aside. "Jamie, I've been meaning to talk to you about the car situation. I know you were upset, but Tyler really needed that tuition money, and, well, family helps family." "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "Family helps family." "I completely agree." "Good," he said, looking relieved. "I knew you'd understand eventually. That's my practical girl." Little did he know just how practical I was about to be. Monday morning arrived with perfect clarity, both in the weather and in my resolve. I'd texted Dad the night before. "Having breakfast at the Lake Placid Inn at 9 a.m. before my meeting. If you and Diane want to join, I might have a solution for your lake house situation." He responded immediately with, "We'll be there," followed by a rare smiley emoji. I arrived early and secured a table overlooking Mirror Lake. The restaurant was upscale but comfortable, white tablecloths and mimosas, the kind of place Dad approved of. At precisely 9:05, I spotted them walking in, Dad in his Brooks Brothers blazer and Diane in a cashmere sweater set, both looking like they'd stepped out of a New England lifestyle magazine. "Jamie," Dad said, sitting down across from me, "this is unexpected. You're usually not a breakfast meeting kind of person." "People change, Dad," I replied, pouring coffee. "I ordered you the steak and eggs. Still your favorite, right?" He looked pleasantly surprised. Good memory. After brief small talk about the drive up from Boston, Dad cleared his throat. "So, you mentioned something about the lake house. Did you find some photographer who wants to rent it for a shoot or something?" I smiled. "Not exactly. My meeting is at Adirondack Trust Bank at 10:30, with the sellers of the lake house." Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What?" "I've made an offer," I said calmly. "It's been accepted. We're finalizing the paperwork today." The color drained from his face. "That's not funny, Jamie." "It's not a joke," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee.
I'm buying the lake house. Diane let out a nervous laugh. Jamie, that house is over $1 million. $1.2 million, to be exact, I corrected.
Plus closing costs. Dad put down his fork with a clatter. What kind of game are you playing? Did you take out some irresponsible loan? Because if you think I'm paying cash, I interrupted, and I'd like you both to come to the closing. Their stunned silence was broken only by the clink of silverware from nearby tables. That's impossible, Dad finally said. You work at some digital marketing company. You complained about student loans less than a year ago. Did I asked innocently. Or did you just assume I was struggling because it fit your narrative about my choices? Where would you get that kind of money? Diane demanded, her voice rising enough that a few heads turned our way. I leaned forward. Remember that little photography side hustle? Turns out I developed a proprietary algorithm for visual asset management during college. I sold the patent 4 years ago for initial capital and equity. My investment portfolio is now worth just over $8 million. Dad's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. $8 million? Give or take, I shrugged. The market's been volatile. Why didn't you tell us? He whispered, sounding genuinely hurt. When exactly should I have mentioned it, Dad? During the Thanksgiving when you called my career a side hustle? Or maybe at Christmas when you spent 20 minutes explaining to your friends why Tyler's consulting job was the future while my creative work was just a phase? Or perhaps when you forged my signature to sell my car without even asking me first? He had the decency to look embarrassed. That was a misunderstanding. No, I cut him off. That was theft, and a perfect example of how little respect you've had for me and my choices since Mom died. The brutal truth hung in the air between us. I think you are being dramatic, Diane interjected, recovering some of her composure. Robert has always wanted the best for all his children. Really? I challenged. Then why has he never once asked me about my career? Why did he miss my first gallery showing but flew to Boston for Tyler's office Christmas party? Why did he call my college degree a hobby while paying every cent of Tyler's education? Dad's face had turned ashen. I didn't realize you felt this way. That's the problem, Dad. You never realized anything about me because you never bothered to look. So this is what? Revenge? He asked, gesturing around us. Buying the house out from under me to prove a point? I shook my head. No. This is me finally being seen. The meeting at the bank is scheduled for 10:30. You're welcome to join us. I've already told the sellers you might be there. In fact, I'd like you to verify the wire transfer. I stood up, placing money on the table for the bill. I'll see you there, or not. For once, it's entirely your choice whether you want to be part of my life. As I walked out, I heard Diane hissing, Robert, she can't be serious. And Dad's stunned reply, I think she is. I drove to the bank alone, unsure if they would show up. Part of me hoped they would, but another part was prepared to sign those papers with or without witnesses. When I pulled into the parking lot of Adirondack Trust, I spotted Dad's Audi already there. My heart skipped a beat as I parked beside it. Inside, Dad and Diane sat stiffly in the waiting area. When they saw me, Dad stood up. Jamie, he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. We're here. It was the first step in what would become the most honest conversation we'd had in 15 years. The bank meeting itself was surreal. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, the elderly couple selling the lake house, were delighted to meet me, having only communicated through real estate agents until then. The bank manager, Mr. Donovan, a silver-haired man with reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewed the paperwork with professional efficiency. So, Ms. Wilson, we'll be processing the wire transfer of $1,200,000 from your account at First Manhattan, he said, sliding the document toward me. Once verified, we'll proceed with the closing. Dad sat rigidly beside me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white.
Diane kept shooting him nervous glances. "And you've brought the parties you mentioned?" Mr. Donovan asked, looking at Dad and Diane questioningly. "Yes," I said. "This is my father, Robert Wilson. He'll be verifying the transfer." Mr. Donovan nodded and turned his screen toward Dad. "Mr. Wilson, if you could just confirm that this is indeed your daughter's transaction and that everything appears in order." Dad leaned forward, eyes widening as he saw the account balance displayed on the screen. The verification was a formality I'd arranged, not legally necessary, but important to me symbolically. His hand trembled slightly as he signed the verification form. "Everything appears in order," he managed, his voice barely audible. 45 minutes later, I was the official owner of the Adirondack Lake House. The Harringtons handed over the keys with warm wishes, mentioning how they'd raised 3 generations of family there and hoped I'd create similar memories. After they left, the 3 of us stood awkwardly in the bank parking lot. "Would you like to see it?" I asked quietly. "It's yours, too, after all." Dad's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I didn't buy it to keep it from you, Dad. I bought it because it mattered to you. And for once, I wanted to be the one who made something important happen." I took a deep breath. The house is in my name, but it's a family home, our family. The drive to the lake house was silent. When we pulled up to the sprawling cedar-sided home with its wraparound porch and dock extending into the crystal-clear lake, Dad got out of his car slowly, as if in a dream. Inside, the great room with its soaring ceilings and stone fireplace opened onto a view of the water that seemed to stretch forever. Dad walked to the windows without speaking, staring out at the vista he'd talked about owning for 20 years. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice breaking. "After everything, why would you do this?" "Because despite everything, you're still my dad," I said, joining him at the window. "And because Mom would have loved this place." At the mention of my mother, something in him crumbled. For the first time since her funeral, I saw my father cry. What followed was a conversation 15 years overdue. We sat on the empty floor of what would become the living room, and I told him everything. About the algorithm I'd developed, about the patent sale, about the investments that had multiplied my initial windfall. But more importantly, I told him how it felt to be the forgotten daughter, the disappointing child, the one whose achievements were footnotes in family conversations. "I never knew," he kept saying. "I never realized." "You never asked," I replied simply. Diane, to her credit, gave us space, wandering the property while we talked. When she returned, her usual polished facade had softened. "This place is magnificent, Jamie," she said, and I detected genuine admiration in her voice for perhaps the first time. "You have an incredible eye." That evening, we drove into town for dinner. The conversation was tentative but real. Dad asked about my company, actually listening to my answers. He seemed genuinely shocked to learn I managed a team of 15 people and had clients like Apple and Netflix. "I just assumed, with the arts degree," he trailed off, embarrassed. "That I was struggling?" I finished for him. "That's the problem, Dad. You've been making assumptions about my life instead of asking about it." 2 days later, after we'd measured rooms and discussed renovation ideas, I returned to New York while they drove back to Boston. The lake house needed work before it would be fully habitable, and I hired contractors to begin renovations. I made sure Dad was included in every decision, sending him samples and sketches, asking for his input. A month after Dad's birthday party, I received an unexpected call from Tyler. His voice was uncharacteristically hesitant. "Jamie, I owe you an apology," he said. "Dad told me what happened with the lake house, and I've been thinking about how I've treated you over the years."
It was the first of several difficult but healing conversations with my step-siblings. Megan called next, then invited me to dinner in the city the next time she visited. Slowly, cautiously, we began building relationships as adults rather than rivals. The most surprising development came 2 months later. Dad called to tell me he'd been speaking with his estate planner. "I'm restructuring everything," he said. "Equal thirds. You, Tyler, and Megan. It should have been that way all along." "You don't have to do that," I told him. "Yes, I do," he insisted. "It's not about the money. God knows you don't need it. It's about recognizing what I should have seen years ago. You are every bit as much my child and every bit as successful, more successful, honestly, as Tyler and Megan." The lake house was finished by Thanksgiving. I invited everyone for the holiday: Dad and Diane, Tyler and his now fiancée Madison, Megan and Dave and their kids. The night before everyone arrived, I wandered through the rooms, touching the walls that now held framed photos, not just from the last 15 years, but from before. Pictures of Mom and Dad and me that had been relegated to boxes in the attic were now prominently displayed alongside newer family photos. In the master bedroom, the one I'd insisted Dad and Diane use whenever they visited, I'd placed a small framed photo of Mom on the dresser, not to make Diane uncomfortable, but as a reminder that our family history didn't begin when they married. To my surprise, when they arrived, Diane added a small vase of fresh flowers beside it, a simple acknowledgement, but a meaningful one. That Thanksgiving was the first time in memory that conversation flowed naturally, without the undercurrent of competition and comparison. Dad asked me detailed questions about my latest projects. Tyler and I discovered a shared interest in kayaking. Megan's kids were fascinated by my camera equipment, and I promised to teach them photography basics. As we gathered around the dining table, a massive reclaimed wood piece I'd commissioned from a local artisan, Dad stood to offer a toast. "To Jamie," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that success comes in many forms, and that true family wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we value each other." His voice wavered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." I looked around at the faces of my blended, imperfect, healing family and realized that the triumph wasn't in proving my worth through money. It was in finally being seen for who I truly was. And as for my car, Dad had quietly bought it back from the dealership and had it delivered to the lake house garage as a surprise. The keys were waiting on the kitchen counter when I arrived, with a note that simply said, "Some things should never have been taken. I'm sorry. Love, Dad." It's been a year since that first Thanksgiving at the lake house. Dad retired early, and he and Diane spend most summers here now. We've established a new tradition of monthly family Zoom calls and quarterly in-person gatherings, something we never would have done before. Last month, I was even a bridesmaid in Tyler's wedding, standing proudly next to Megan as Madison walked down the aisle. The journey from invisible daughter to recognized family member wasn't about the money, though I won't lie, the look on Dad's face when he saw that bank transfer will stay with me forever. It was about breaking patterns that had defined us for too long. Sometimes the only way to heal a family is to disrupt it first. I didn't buy that lake house out of spite or revenge. I bought it because I wanted to transform something painful into something healing. That's the thing about family wounds. They don't heal when you ignore them. They heal when you bring them into the light, even when it hurts. If you're watching this and feeling unseen in your own family, remember, your worth isn't determined by their recognition. Build your life on your terms. Success is the best answer to doubt, but forgiveness is the best response to hurt. And sometimes the family you rebuild can be stronger than the one you were born into. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, sometimes the greatest triumph isn't proving others wrong, It's finding the strength to invite them back into your life after they finally see you clearly.